Some promises aren't made with words. They're etched in scars. On one man's back, a promise was written in 15 lashes. On another man's soul, that same promise was forged into a cannon. This is the story of two men, one biscuit, and a debt that can only be paid in blood and gunpowder. Prison walls don't crumble at sunrise unless someone planned it for 15 years, and nobody plans longer than a man who once shared your last biscuit. The air still tastes of scorched black powder when the camera eye sweeps over Cartagena's shattered fortress. Stone teeth jagged against a bleeding sky, iron bars twisted into question marks, a lone cannon glowing ember red like a dying star. In the hush between thunder and tide, a single figure limps across the breach. His ragged naval coat flaps like a surrender flag, yet his eyes, one blue, one clouded by an old saber slash, burn with something fiercer than victory. He is looking for a ship that isn't there. He is looking for the boy he once fed with half a biscuit. Freeze the frame. Zoom in on the soot streaking his cheek. Listen. Gulls scream overhead, echoing the same word he whispered 15 years ago. Live. Flash white card. HMS Leviathan 1809, 18 months after Trafalgar. Cut to darkness so thick you can smell it. Tar, sweat, the metallic bite of rusting chains. The prison hulk rocks in the Thames fog. Each swell slops bilge water across the floorboards, carrying the sour stink of rye that's turned to vinegar and men who've turned to ghosts. In the belly of this floating dungeon, 23-year-old sailor Elias Finch huddles on a plank no wider than a coffin lid. His wrists are raw from irons, his ribs countable like the knots in a hangman's noose. Across from him, the boy, Marco Rinaldi, 17, already nicknamed the Ghost for his hollow cheeks, shivers in fever dreams. His breath whistles through cracked lips. For days without food. For days since the guards laughed and tossed a single hardtack onto the floor like a bone to dogs. The biscuit lies between them now, palm-sized, gray, speckled with weevils. Maggots wriggle, fat and white as grains of rice. Elias's stomach cramps so violently he tastes blood at the back of his throat. One bite and he could stand watch tomorrow, maybe earn an extra ration. One bite and Marco might not see sunrise. 60 seconds. Above deck, the ship's bell tolls the dog watch. 8 clangs that count down like a heartbeat. Boots scrape. Keys jangle. Inspection in 1 minute. The guard's voice slices through timber and fear. Elias lifts the biscuit. Feels its weight, no heavier than regret, yet heavier than iron. He tears it in half. Weevils spill like spilled secrets. With thumbnail and prayer he flicks the maggots away, then presses the cleaner half between Marco's teeth. The boy stirs. Eyes flutter open, black as tropic nights, and lock onto Elias's face as if memorizing every scar. He chews once, swallows, and in the rasp of that swallow Elias hears a vow older than language. I will remember. Boots thunder down the companionway. Torchlight floods the hold. The guard's shadow falls across them like a blade. What's this, Finch? Charity? The boot connects with Elias's ribs, lifts him, slams him back into chains. The remaining half-biscuit skitters into the slime. Elias smiles through blood. Just sharing breakfast, sir. The guard spits. You'll share lashes instead. 15 strokes. Each one writes a promise across Elias's back. Bread given freely can break any wall. As the whip falls, Marco's eyes never leave Elias. In their fevered depths, blueprints bloom, of cannons forged in secret, of iron balls etched with tiny letters, of a fortress gate that will one day echo with the taste of stale biscuit and maggot-less hope. Tell me, if the lash were falling on your skin, would you still split your last crumb knowing it might one day come back as cannon fire? Comment before the next lash lands. Because outside the shattered fortress at sunrise, Elias is still looking for the boy who became a cannon, and the cannonball is already in the air, etched with the word biscuit, and it hasn't touched ground yet. 8 years later, Cartagena Penitentiary. 1817. The Caribbean sun is a white-hot coin pressed against the sky, and inside the fortress courtyard the stones sweat. Marco Rinaldi lifts a sledgehammer, swings, and the clang of iron on iron sings like church bells in hell. Sparks shower the dust. He is 25 now, shoulders corded, skin the color of burnt cedar, and every stroke of the hammer writes a love letter to the man who once gave him half a biscuit. All around him, convicts pause to watch. Not because the blacksmith is beautiful, but because the thing he's forging is impossible. A cannon barrel no longer than a man's arm, its muzzle etched with tiny letters. For the biscuit. When the letters catch the light, they look like teeth. Marco tastes rust between his teeth, same as he tasted blood the night Elias took 15 lashes. He remembers the weight of that half-biscuit dissolving on his tongue, how it felt like swallowing sunrise. He has calculated every grain of that meal, converted it into iron filings smuggled spoonful by spoonful inside a hollowed-out Bible. 1 biscuit equals 3 pounds of powder equals 1 breach in a wall equals 1 sunrise no one can take away. Across the bay, Elias Finch, discharged, broken, tending a tavern whose roof leaks rum and regret, hears the rhythmic clang and thinks it's church bells. Then he remembers Cartagena has no churches inside the prison walls, only cannons that haven't fired in 30 years. The sound is wrong. It's too precise, too patient. It's the sound of a promise keeping time. Marco lifts the finished barrel, cradles it like a child. Sweat cuts rivulets through the soot on his chest. Tonight the tide will be highest at 2:17 a.m. He's charted the moon phases for 6 months. 1 shot will punch through the seawall, drain the moat, and collapse the powder magazine. The recoil will shatter the fortress from the inside out. Freedom will taste like saltpeter and sea spray. But freedom has a price he hasn't yet weighed. In the tavern, Elias polishes a pewter mug and tries not to count days. 3 years since he last saw Marco's eyes across a prison bar. 8 since the biscuit. He tells himself the boy, no, the man, has forgotten. Then a dockhand bursts through the door, breathless. Governor's hosting a banquet inside the fortress tonight. 50 servants, 20 guards, fireworks over the harbor. Elias's hand stops mid-polish. The mug slips, clatters, spills rum like blood. 50 innocent lives between Marco and the sunrise he's been forging. He knows that sound. He knows that rhythm. Cannon iron sings the same song whether it's building empires or tearing them down. Midnight. Powder room. Marco kneels in the dark, fingers counting cartridges the way monks count beads. 30 pounds of powder. Enough to crack the wall, enough to crack the world. He whispers Elias's name, not as prayer but as measurement. 1 biscuit, 15 lashes, 30 pounds of powder. The arithmetic of gratitude. A rat scurries across his boot. He flinches, remembers the maggots, remembers the taste of shared bread and shared pain. He thinks of the governor's banquet upstairs. Silver platters, sugared limes, laughter sharp enough to cut chains. He thinks of Elias pouring rum for men who will never know what it costs to swallow sunrise. He strikes flint against steel. The spark is tiny, beautiful, lethal. It dances on the fuse like a promise keeping time. Elias on the wharf, he sprints through alleyways that smell of dead fish and gunpowder. His boots slap puddles that reflect moonlight like broken mirrors. In his pocket, a stale biscuit, saved from this morning's breakfast, wrapped in oilskin, still bearing the tooth marks of memory. He reaches the fortress gate as the tide begins to turn. The clang of the blacksmith's hammer has stopped. The silence is louder than thunder. T-5 minutes. Marco lights the fuse. Orange snake hisses along stone, spitting sparks into the dark. He pictures Elias's face the night the whip fell, smiling, through blood, as if pain were just another way to share bread. T-4 minutes. Elias pounds on the postern gate. Guards laugh, shove him away. He holds up the biscuit like a relic. Tell Marco Rinaldi the baker is here. The words taste like salt and desperation. T-3 minutes. Inside the banquet hall, silver forks freeze midair. Somewhere below, the fuse burns closer to the powder magazine. 50 servants glance at the ceiling, tasting iron in the air. T-2 minutes. Marco hears his name shouted across the courtyard. Elias's voice, hoarse, older, unmistakable. The fuse is a comet now, racing towards sunrise. T-1 minute. They lock eyes across the breach. 1 man with a biscuit, 1 man with a match. Between them, 50 lives and 15 years of hunger. Freeze frame. The fuse is an inch from powder. Elias's hand stretches out, palm open, biscuit balanced like an offering. Tell me, if you were Marco, cannon loaded and freedom one spark away, would you snuff the fuse or light the sky? Comment below before the next second explodes. The biscuit that saved a life was never meant to be eaten. Not really. It lay in Elias Finch's sea chest for 15 years, wrapped in oilskin the color of dried blood, its edges fossil hard, its surface etched by tiny teeth marks like Morse code. Every night he unfolded it, sniffed the ghost of mold, and remembered the boy who swallowed sunrise. He never noticed the pinprick letters baked into the underside, until tonight. 2:03 a.m. Cartagena prison rooftop. Marco Rinaldi crouches beside the cannon he forged from memory and hatred. Wind tastes of gunpowder and wet stone. In one hand, a slow match hisses. In the other, a letter he pried from the warden's safe an hour ago. Wax seal broken, ink still damp with fear. The letter is addressed to the governor. It begins, "When the prisoner lights his toy, let him believe he's free." The magazine beneath the banquet hall is already empty. The real powder waits beneath the orphanage across the bay. Marco's pulse stalls. The orphans. 46 small voices who taught him how to carve wooden ships in exchange for scraps of bread, are asleep above barrels of powder he never knew existed. The governor plans to blame Marco's failed escape for their deaths, ignite a war, and erase the prison's debts in the explosion's red glare. Flashback 15 years earlier, HMS Leviathan whip falls. 15 lashes. Each stripe across Elias's back forms a letter. Avi. Marco, shackled opposite, counts them like rosary beads. Between strokes 9 and 10, the ship's cook, a one-eyed giant named O'Brady, leans in, pretending to tighten chains. He slips a folded scrap into Elias's boot sole. "Biscuit recipe," he whispers. "Guard it like bread." Elias never bakes. He eats half, gives half to Marco, and forgets the scrap, until tonight when O'Brady's ghost or guilt leads him to reopen the chest. Present. 2:07 a.m. Elias stands on the wharf, oilskin packet trembling in salt-stung fingers. The parchment inside isn't a recipe. It's a map drawn in dried lemon juice and candle soot, coordinates, a second magazine, and a single line scrawled in the cook's blocky hand. The biscuit always had two sides, one to feed, one to free. The other side of the biscuit, now crumbling in Elias's palm, reveals pinprick words only visible when held to flame. If the boy lights the fuse, the children burn. If the baker swallows pride, the children wake. Marco on the rooftop doesn't know. He thinks he's firing one righteous shot. He thinks the governor's banquet is the only collateral. He thinks Elias is still the man who smiled through lashes. Elias sprints. 2:09 a.m. Marco lowers the match. Sparks kiss the fuse. Orange serpent slithers toward destiny. Elias crashes through the postern gate, lungs blazing. "Wrong target," he shouts, but wind eats the words. He sees Marco silhouetted against the moon, cannon muzzle gaping like a confession. Freeze frame. In Marco's mind, the biscuit dissolving on his tongue, the lash marks spelling LIV across Elias's skin, the promise that bread shared is sorrow halved, and sorrow repaid with thunder. In Elias's hand, the biscuit's broken half, now glowing like a coal in the lantern light. The pinprick letters rearrange themselves into a single word, when viewed at the correct angle. Choose. The fuse is 3 inches from powder. Tell me, if you were Marco, cannon loaded and orphan sleeping across the bay, would you trust the man who once fed you half a biscuit, or the letter that claims he's been part of the conspiracy all along? Comment below before the next spark decides. T-120 seconds. Rooftop, cannon muzzle kissing moonlight. Marco's match is a living star between his fingers. Sparks spit onto his knuckles, branding tiny comets into skin. Salt wind slithers through the parapet, tasting of gunpowder and regret. He places the match to the fuse. A gray serpent that wakes with fired T-115. Courtyard below. Elias barrels through the postern gate, boots drumming on stone slick with evening dew. Torchlight carves his shadow into a lanky prayer racing against its own echo. He tastes rust. Whether from blood or memory, he can't tell. T-110. Split-screen heartbeat rooftop. Fuse crackles like dry kindling. Marco's eyes lock on the banquet hall windows glowing amber with governor's laughter. He thinks of 46 orphans asleep above unknowing Barrel's courtyard. Elias skids, shoulders scraping brick. He smells the biscuit again. Mold, salt, and 15 years of waiting. T-100. Marco cups the fuse, whispering to the flame as if it were a child. Burn true. T-95. Elias rounds the powder magazine corner and sees the fuse's orange tongue already halfway home. He shouts, but wind swallows the word. His voice is raw biscuit crumbs scraping a throat long dry. T-90. Rooftop. Marco's heartbeat syncs with the fuse. Each spark is a lash from 15 years ago. The biscuit dissolving, the whip falling, the promise carved in flesh. Courtyard. Elias draws the old flintlock he swore never to fire. One shot left. He could sever the fuse, or the hand that holds it. T-80. Fuse sizzles past the halfway mark, hissing a lullaby of inevitability. Marco tastes smoke and childhood hunger. T-75. Elias's pistol trembles. He remembers the biscuit's weight, how it felt like swallowing sunrise. He remembers Marco's eyes that night. Black holes begging for light. T-70. Rooftop. Marco glances toward the orphanage chimney. A curl of innocent smoke rises, unaware it's already a ghost. T-65. Courtyard. Elias raises the flintlock. The biscuit's ghost whispers from his pocket. Choose the children or choose the man who saved you. T-60. Fuse kisses the powder keg's lip like a lover late to a duel. T-55. Marco sees Elias below, pistol raised. Their eyes meet across 15 years and 40 feet of stone. Time folds. T-50. Elias mouths one word. Wait. T-45. Marco hesitates. The flame hesitates. The universe balances on the edge of a biscuit crumb. T-40. Courtyard. A guard rounds the corner, musket leveled. Elias spins, fires. The bullet sings past Marco's ear and strikes the fuse mid-body, severing it clean. Sparks die mid-dance. T-35. Silence, so loud the moon rings. T-30. Marco's hand still holds the dead match, trembling. Elias's pistol smokes like a burnt offering. T-25. Guard shouts. Reloads. More boots drum. T-20. Marco leaps from the rooftop, lands cat-like beside Elias. They stand back to back, two men who once shared half a sunrise. T-15. Soldiers close in, muskets leveled. Torchlight glints on bayonets like teeth. T-10. Marco pulls the biscuit's other half from his pocket. Petrified now, edges jagged as guilt. He presses it into Elias's palm. T-5. Both men taste mold, salt, and 15 years of waiting. T-0. Freeze frame. Biscuit between them, bayonets at their throats, fuse smoldering like a question unanswered. Tell me. Light the fuse again and risk the orphans, or drop the match and face the soldiers? Comment below before the next heartbeat decides. Dawn bleeds gold across the harbor, and the biscuit finally breaks. For good. The soldiers' muskets hover at Elias's and Marco's throats, bayonets trembling like compass needles that forgot which way is mercy. Smoke from the severed fuse still curls between them, a dying question mark. The governor, safe on his yacht, has not yet realized the fuse was never meant for his banquet. It was meant for the story he tried to erase. Marco opens his fist. The petrified half-biscuit sits in his palm like a fossilized sunrise. He turns to Elias, voice cracked by gunpowder and regret. You once fed me half of this. I'm giving it back whole. He crushes the biscuit between thumb and forefinger. A fine dust, flour, salt, 15 years of hunger, drifts onto the cobblestones. Where it lands, the stones darken, as if remembering every lash that carved Avi into Elias's back. Point. One of the soldiers, barely 18, freckles still fading beneath sunburn, lowers his musket an inch. What is that? He asks, voice raw. Marco meets his eyes. Breakfast. And a promise. Behind the soldiers, the orphanage door creaks open. 46 small faces peer out, barefoot, eyes wide as moons. The oldest girl, clutching a wooden ship Marco carved for her last week, steps forward. She cups her hands beneath the falling crumbs. They stick to her palms like stardust. She tastes one fleck. Her face lights up, not with hunger, but with recognition. "It's sweet," she whispers, because somewhere in the crushing, the mold has turned to sugar. Sacrifice, aged long enough, becomes grace. The governor's yacht chooses that moment to explode, not from cannon fire, from the keg Marco never lit. A second fuse, hidden by the cook's ghost 15 years ago, time to detonate when the tide turned and the governor's greed weighed heaviest. The blast blossoms orange against the dawn, a sunrise that belongs to everyone. The shockwave knocks the soldiers to their knees. Muskets clatter like dropped spoons. Elias and Marco don't run. They kneel to the children who are suddenly, miraculously, free. Later, when the smoke clears, the soldiers help carry water buckets to douse the embers. The freckled boy asks Elias how a biscuit could sink a governor's empire. Elias shows him the scar across his shoulder blade, the letters still legible beneath weathered skin. "Bread shared," he says, "is sorrow halved, and sorrow, shared long enough, becomes justice." 6 months later, the fortress is gone. In its place stands a low stone bakery whose chimney curls with cinnamon and sea salt. A sign above the door reads, "Half a sunrise." Inside, Marco kneads dough to the rhythm of hammers he no longer needs. Elias tends the ovens, whistling the tuneless lullaby Marco hummed in chains. Every dawn, they bake one extra loaf. They place it on the windowsill still warm, no price tag. Beside it sits the other half of the original biscuit, now sealed in glass, its surface freckled with tiny tooth marks like constellations, children from the orphanage. Now a bustling school. Race each other to be first to break the loaf. They tear it in half, always in half, and hand the bigger piece to the next child in line. One morning, the freckled soldier, now apprentice baker, asks Marco why the biscuit stays behind glass when the bread disappears every day. Marco lifts the glass dome. The biscuit has shrunk further, edges crumbling, but its smell, faint, sweet, stubborn, still lingers. Because, he says, some things aren't meant to be eaten. They're meant to be remembered, until the day we no longer need to remember, because we've become the memory. Elias nods, tears shining like sunrise. And then we pass it on. Years blur. The bakery becomes a harbor legend. Ships flying half-mast colors dock just to taste the sunrise loaf. Couples marry beneath the stone arch Elias and Marco built from the fortress rubble. On each wedding day, the couple breaks a loaf together, crumbs sprinkled into the sea so the tide carries their promise too. Every shore, and every evening, as the ovens cool, Elias and Marco sit on the doorstep, sharing the last slice of the day. They never speak of the governor, the whip, or the cannon. They speak of tomorrow's dough, of children learning to knead hope into flour. One night, a storm batters the coast. Waves crash over the bakery's low wall. Elias and Marco race to save the ovens, but water has already reached the biscuit's glass case. They pry it open, expecting ruin. Instead, the biscuit has dissolved into a single golden crumb, light as breath. It floats on the floodwater, glowing. Marco cups it in his palm. Looks like it's finally ready. Elias smiles. Ready for what? To be eaten. They place the crumb on their tongues. Tastes like sunrise, salt, and 15 years of waiting. The storm quiets, as if satisfied as dawn breaks. They hang a new sign above the door. Full sunrise. Below it, a small wooden plaque reads, "One biscuit fed 2 men. 2 men fed a harbor. A harbor feeds the world, one half at a time." Elias turns to the camera that isn't there, but might be you. "Your turn," he says, voice soft as fresh dough. "Break something open today. Fear, anger, hunger, and share the bigger half." Subscribe if you believe the smallest kindness can still tear down empires. And if you're hungry for more stories where courage rises like bread, click the next video, because sunrise tastes better when shared.